Good evening and welcome to this episode of Viking.TV. I'm here with Heather Donahue and James Prismal. My name is Joost Ouendag. You will see me on camera. The other two are behind the scenes making sure that everything works the way we want it to work. Apologies if my face is a little blurry. We have had some difficulties with the camera. I'm sure that eventually this will settle in, and through much of this presentation you'll see my head only in a corner of your screen, so it will not disturb you all that much. I apologize though. We're going to be talking about the Rhine Getaway, and that is one of our big classic itineraries. This is part of the Rhine Week. If you watched on Monday, you saw some of my colleagues from the nautical team explain what it is that they do with the ships, how navigation works and things like that. Then yesterday there was a lecture on the history of Germany. Tomorrow there is the Princess of Hohenzollern. And then on Friday is a very dear friend of mine, Gisela Ruckert, who is going to explain to you, and this is the one that you have to see when it comes to the Rhine. She's going to explain to you how to make your own Black Forest cake. So I have the bit in the middle, hump day, and we'll talk about the itinerary that basically navigates between Amsterdam and Basel. That is the navigable portion of the Rhine. Further up river from Basel, there's really not any way to have a cruise ship go anywhere. There's literally bridges, and then not far from Basel on the outskirts, there's a lock that's just too small for a ship of our size. And so we cover everything that you can possibly cover on the Rhine. And today I'm going to walk you through the itinerary from Amsterdam upriver to Basel. And the way we will do this is I will give you a brief overview first. And then I will tell you a little bit of a story for every day. And at the end of every day, I will pause, and then I can answer some questions that you may have. The idea is that we answer some questions during, and then also after I'm done with the entire presentation. So off we go. Let's start with a brief introduction of the Rhine Getaway.
Our Rhine Getaway itinerary presents all the highlights of the legendary Rhine in just 8 days. Your journey begins in timeless Amsterdam. Soak in rich colours amid the stained glass of Cologne's Gothic cathedral. Explore the mighty Ehrenbreitstein fortress that overlooks Koblenz, and enjoy an evening stroll along the cobblestones of Rüdesheim. With dawn comes Speyer, a quaint German town on the Rhine's west bank, where you can marvel at the architectural splendour of the city's Romanesque cathedral. Strasbourg, France follows with its timeless old town, while Germany's Black Forest region is rich in history and culture. Your voyage concludes in the pretty city of Basel, Switzerland.
Okay, so that was a brief introduction to the entire itinerary, and we will now start with the beginning for the Amsterdam to Basel part of the itinerary, the Basel Amsterdam direction. Amsterdam Basel, I'm sorry. Amsterdam is where you fly in relatively early in the morning most of the time, because it's on the far western edge of Europe. What you want to do, though, I think personally, and I have a vested interest because I'm from the Netherlands and I want you to see a lot of my country. What you would want to do before you start with your itinerary is spend 2 days in Amsterdam. We have extensions either in Amsterdam or in The Hague. And I'll give you an idea of the difference. Amsterdam is the capital of the Netherlands. It's the biggest city. It has an enormous array of museums, and it is really worth it to spend 2 days there just before you start your cruise. It does a handful of things. It gives you some time to explore on your own. It gives you a little bit of time to catch your breath from a transatlantic flight. And then it kind of is an easy into the itinerary itself. the alternative is that you spend 2 nights with us in The Hague, and we combine that a little bit. We spend some time in The Hague, and then on the day of embarkation, you spend some time traveling in Amsterdam. The distances in Holland are such that Amsterdam to The Hague is not more than about an hour and 15 minutes. It all depends a little bit on traffic. The Hague, I would say, is a really interesting city that is not on many people's radar screen. What you see here in this image is the Peace Palace. The Hague is the seat of the International Court of Justice. It is also the actual residence of the King of the Netherlands. The Dutch have a strange combo of the capital being in Amsterdam, but the residency and the seat of government is in The Hague. So in The Hague, you will find Parliament, you will find the Palace of the King. You will also find a small little museum that has one of the most famous paintings in the Netherlands, The Girl with the Pearl Earring by Vermeer. And that museum was originally the private collection of one of the Counts of Holland. And that makes it, because it is a private collection, a very intimate little museum with sort of a, if you will, if I may be a little a little flippant, it's the best of the Dutch Golden Age. It's not nearly as large as the Rijksmuseum. And speaking of the Rijksmuseum, if what you want is, a very healthy doses of art, I would recommend that you spend more time in Amsterdam, because it is, as far as art is concerned, it is really the center of everything in the Netherlands. It has, in the Van Gogh Museum, it has the largest Van Gogh collection in the world. And in the Rijksmuseum, it has the history of the Netherlands in art. And it has a lot more than just art. It has a lot of incredibly interesting artifacts of the Dutch Golden Age, all the way to artifacts of more modern times. It embeds the art into a chronicle of the Netherlands. Okay, and so then now let's assume that you arrive without a few pre-nights into Amsterdam. You would still, arriving usually before midday, make sure you're well rested and spend that half day on your own, doing what you can to get a good overview of Amsterdam. We also, for people that arrive on time and people that feel like it, we offer a guided walk through Amsterdam. This is not a guided tour as you would normally expect it. It's really aimed for people to kind of stretch your legs. There's a little bit of light commentary, but it's really kind of to get some fresh air after the long flight. This is a view of one of the bridges of Amsterdam. And of course, if you have time, as you look at all this water, if you have time, the one thing that you need to do in Amsterdam, in whatever way, shape, or form you do it, is see the city from the water. The canals is what makes Amsterdam famous, and it is really a very unique vantage point. And there are all manners of little boats. You can ask on the ship to set you up on the day of arrival with with boats of all shapes and sizes. You can get an evening cruise. You can do a day cruise in a somewhat smaller vessel. There's even places, and that depends a little bit on the weather. I wouldn't recommend it if the weather is early in spring, if it's not so great. But you can also use these pedal boats and be self-propelled through the canals of Amsterdam. A little tip: you saw that building with the double gable with the lights in it. It's easy to find. They have the best. Thank you. They have the best apple cake in all of Amsterdam, with an enormous amount of whipped cream. Thought that was important for those of you that like your apple cake with a lot of whipped cream. Keukenhof. This is an image of Keukenhof, where from about mid-March, third week of March, to mid-May, there are tens of thousands of flowers in bloom. And if you have the time, and if you travel in that time frame, it's kind of something that you would really want to do. We will offer it on the on arrival in case that you have the time. We will certainly do it if you have a few pre-nights in Amsterdam. And of course, this only makes good sense if you're there while the tulips are in bloom. As a matter of fact, the park closes once the flowering season is over. And it starts, depending on the weather, it starts in mid-March. I think it usually opens around the 18th or the 19th of March, and then it runs all the way to the middle of May. Okay, so that's gives you an idea of Amsterdam. This is a picture of the Yellow House in Arles by Van Gogh. Again, Amsterdam has the largest collection of Van Gogh paintings anywhere in the world. And the thing with the museum in Amsterdam, there are other places that have a phenomenal collection of Van Gogh paintings. But the beautiful thing I think of the Van Gogh in Amsterdam is that it chronicles the man's life story. And it is such a touching story that to a degree, some of the exhibits, they show, for instance, his tools, his painting kit. Some of those exhibits are make almost as big of an impression as the paintings themselves, because you kind of experience the man and his work together in one exhibit. It's really a very exceptional museum in that sense. Okay, and then as we move on from Amsterdam, in the evening, we will then start the ship, as you're probably already asleep, and we will bring you through the night to an industrial landscape. And of course, that doesn't sound very exciting at all. The industrial landscape is thankfully a landscape that is hundreds of years old, and the machinery there, the power plants, are windmills. And the windmills of the Netherlands are very iconic, but it is interesting, and this is really part of the heritage that is kept alive in Kinderdijk. It is interesting to understand that these are, people lived in them, people still live in them. These are machines, these are power plants. The mills in Kinderdijk specifically were run to keep the land around the windmills dry. They're water pumps, in essence. And it's a very intricate system of several canals and several steps. There are inner mills and outer mills, and the inner mills pump the water into a ring canal, and then from the outer mills pump from the ring canal into a river, and that river drains into the sea. Today, it's a living museum, but it's really a living and breathing museum in the sense that people live in these mills virtually for free, but not only do they have to maintain the mills, they also have an obligation to run the mills for a specific number, and I don't know the exact number, but they have to run the mill for a number of hours every year. And the interesting thing is that you have, I would say, in Kinderdijk, we work with the people in Kinderdijk very closely. There's about a third of the people there that run the number of hours that they're supposed to run, that's mandated by their contract. And then there are a handful of millers that are just, they do it for the sport. They run the mills as much as they can. And when we visit, we take people into a mill, we talk to the miller explains how it all works. If we're lucky, and that doesn't happen all the time, but if we're lucky, we can see how he's setting up his sails and how he starts running the mill. It's quite it takes about, for a big mill, it takes about 20 minutes for it to start running, and there's a lot of muscle power involved. And we offer the windmill in combination with a handful of other things. We understand that we learned from our guests, that people sometimes want things just a little different. There needs to be a little bit of choice, we learned. And what we do in Kinderdijk is we combine Kinderdijk with a visit to a cheese farm. This is a working, living, breathing cheese farm. This is not something that you will find on the outskirts of Amsterdam that is done for tourists. So when you go there, you need to have sturdy shoe wear, because you may go into a stable and you may see the calves and the cows that the milk comes from. You will be able to walk through and observe how the entire process works. You'll have a taste of the cheese. You can buy some cheese, and have a conversation with someone who is actually in the process of making a living. It's a perfect example of what we call the Viking way of exploring. It's a working world. We believe that our guests, you, are interested in finding out what makes people tick in the destinations that we visit. This means we want you to meet real people, possibly at their homes. We want you to see real workers in action. We want you to experience something that is authentic. And we want you to have, if we can, we will provide you with a peek behind the scenes of places that you would normally not be able to visit on your own. We call that privileged access. We have some of this in Kinderdijk because a few years ago they asked us, the organization that runs Kinderdijk, if we would be interested in sponsoring the restoration of a 19th century boat, a boat that used to be pulled by a horse in canals just like the ones that you see at Kinderdijk. We said yes, and we now have the rights to use that boat for our guests, and people that book this experience can be on that historical vessel through the canal and see a mill that is not normally accessible very much because the walkways that run through Kinderdijk don't touch that mill. You have to kind of get there by water or by back roads. So we have a nugget of privileged access in Kinderdijk. I will point out some other places where we have things that you cannot book while you're on your own, and you cannot book when you do this with other organizations, because they're kind of based on the relationships that Viking has built over the years in many of these places. In the afternoon, as we are heading now for Germany, we will contextualize what you've seen in the Netherlands, what you've experienced, the golden age of art, but also the golden age of engineering with the windmills during a lecture that kind of takes a number of famous Dutch paintings. This is a work by Jan Steen, and it's all about the vanities. Jan Steen was a deeply religious man. He was also a fun painter. You can see that the painting is very lively, and if you have a lot of time to look at the details, you will chuckle throughout the entire painting. The lecture focuses on a number of paintings and tells the story of the Netherlands through the Golden Age for context and maybe for a little bit of art history. And then you travel again a little bit through the night. You cross the border into Germany, and the next day we arrive in Cologne. And what you see on the right-hand side of this image is the great cathedral. And before I start talking about Cologne, Heather, are there any questions so far about Amsterdam or about Kinderdijk?
Hi, Joost. Yes, we've had lots of questions in about Amsterdam.
Okay.
First of all, Jane in the US, she says, we have a 2-day extension in Amsterdam booked for April 2022. What would you say are the must-see places?
Okay, you have 2 days, and I'm just going to assume that you will try to spend those 2 days very, very well, and that you're going to think, okay, I can take a break once I'm on that ship moving from Kinderdijk to Germany. I'm going to have a quiet afternoon on the Waal, and that's when I will take a nap after lunch to catch up with my sleep. So you would have to do the Rijksmuseum. You would have to, right next door is the Van Gogh, and I would maybe do the Rijksmuseum on one day and do the Van Gogh on another day, and then spend the afternoons on foot. If you can, Amsterdam is really a city to explore on foot. And so I would, just walking along the canals is just such a wonderful experience. You don't really need to have a big program. I would walk in the concentric circles. There are streets that radiate out from the center of the city along those canals. But what you really want to do is walk the canals themselves, and they are concentric circles around the center of Amsterdam. Really big thing for the city, and one of the highlights for many people is a visit to the Anne Frank house. As soon as you know when you travel, go online, go to the website of the Anne Frank house and book a ticket. We are unfortunately not in a position where we can help you with this. We would if we could, but the Anne Frank house is on a mission. It's an educational mission, and they want to make sure that they're never beholden to any tour operators, and therefore they say no. We have a website that works wonderfully well. It's in a lot of different languages, and we would want people to do this directly with us. And we respect that. It's a very, how do I put this? A very straightforward mission that the Anne Frank House has. And this is how that translates. They want people to individually make a connection. It's a very poignant experience, but you have to book it in advance. Don't rely on last minute tickets, because chances are that you will waste a lot of time and will be disappointed. Make sure that you have a piece of apple cake with a good amount of whipped cream on it. Spend some time in the really old part of town, because that's really, it's old Amsterdam. And there are a lot of streets that kind of skirt the red light district that are just beautiful. They're very calm, they're very quiet. It has beautiful architecture, and it shows you what the Netherlands looked like in the 16th and 17th centuries. That's it. Heather, next question, let's go.
Thank you. We have the same question has come in from two viewers, Laurie in the United States and Diane. They both ask, what is the name of the shop in Amsterdam which sells the apple cake?
Oh gosh, you know what? I will, as we progress, I will have to put that. I will have to come back to you at the end, because it's just one of those places. I go there, and I know exactly what it looks like, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head. But I will look it up. And before the show's over, I will let you know.
Thank you, Joost. And then one last question on Amsterdam from Jeffrey in the United States. He says, we're taking the cruise in November to take advantage of the Christmas markets. Will the Amsterdam canals be open to go on a tour?
Yes. And the canals don't freeze over. You will likely have a somewhat more limited offer in the way of boats, because some of the companies, especially the smaller companies, don't think it's worth their while, because there are days where it's just not all that pleasant. But I would recommend it. I would just, I would bundle up, even if it's a little cold. I would just bundle up and still do it, because it's just such a quintessential Amsterdam experience. I don't think, aside from Venice and St. Peter, there are a handful of these cities in the world. Yes, there's St. Petersburg, there's Amsterdam, there's certainly Venice. You have to see those cities from the water, because it feels, the city was built in the swamp, and the canals are really what made this city come alive. It's really how people traveled. It's really how people would get freight from one place to another. It's such a crucial and such an important element. So do it, bundle up, and yes, you can.
Wonderful, thank you, Joost. On to Cologne now.
Sorry, on to Cologne. Okay. So we had the slide that showed you on the right hand side of the screen Cologne Cathedral, and on the on the left hand side, that is Groß Sankt Martin. That is one of Cologne's Romanesque churches. And then there's a little tower in the middle, and that tower is of the old city hall. It's one of the oldest city halls in Germany, and it's a phenomenal building that has history that goes back hundreds of years. Right in front of it, actually, and that is almost finished now. I believe that it should open this year. After years and years of renovation, there is a very extensive mikveh, a Jewish ritual bath underground that is being opened and has been restored. Cologne is one of the oldest cities in Germany, and it was terribly ravaged during World War II because it was such an important industrial hub and an important transportation hub. But nonetheless, although you see a lot of buildings that were restored or rebuilt after World War II, there is layer upon layer upon layer of history in Cologne. And under City Hall is where you will find medieval Jewish history. Not far from City Hall, you can dig deeper, and there are canalizations that were built by the Romans. I really wanted to look up the cafe. The name of the cafe in Amsterdam is Papeneiland. That is Papeneiland. It means Island of the Pope. It was named that, the entire island was named that, and the cafe has adopted that name because it was a Catholic enclave in the city of Amsterdam. It's where a lot of Catholics lived. That's where the name comes from. And I asked James to crash his computer for a moment so that I had time to look it up. Such are the pitfalls of live streaming. I had just started to explain to you how we can bring you up to the roof of Cologne Cathedral. This is an excursion that we can only do with a small number of people because the elevator that goes up there is usually only used for the people that work on the top of the cathedral. And it's going up there in and by itself is quite an experience already. But let me not waste my time because we have such a wonderful video about it that gives it to you, in moving pictures. So let's look at that.
In the 12th century, Cologne was a quiet city. That is until the day their Archbishop Reinald von Dassel brought home an incredible treasure from Italy. The bones of the biblical three wise men. This remarkable relic required an extraordinary home of worship. So they built on the city's most spiritual site.
The place where Cologne Cathedral stands is a very, very old place to held services. In the year 313, Bishop Maternus do the services with the Christians. So over 1800 years, this place is used for the church.
With location in hand, the foundation stone for the Cologne Cathedral was laid. Construction progressed at an incredible pace. A rate that legend has it was due to a bet the architect made with the devil. Desperate for fame, he offered the souls of himself and his family for the cathedral's inspired drawings, but only if the devil could build it in record time. Luckily, the story goes, his wife discovered the bet and with cleverness halted the project short of completion, thwarting the devil. But the haunting silhouette of the unfinished cathedral tainted the skyline for nearly 4 centuries. It's been said the French invasion of 1794 and their use of the cathedral as a stable was key to reigniting interest in the project. Finally, in 1880, the tallest twin-spired church in the world was complete. Outside, this exquisite cathedral embodies the artistic spirit of Gothic architecture. But it's inside that the level of detail becomes nearly overwhelming.
The ceiling is so high. Cologne Cathedral has the 3rd highest walls in the world. You have to imagine that the craftsmen work here 700 years ago with so less technical supporting systems. The working process is very painful and very impressive.
The cavernous nave with its 142-foot high ceiling easily accommodates nearly 90,000 square feet of stained glass, while providing an eternal setting in which to worship the golden reliquary of the three wise men. Exploring behind the scenes, I discovered a side of this architectural masterpiece most people miss. In the blink of an eye, you're in the midst of a hand-carved forest of spires. It's an unusual perspective, a bird's-eye view of artistic elements, where you can examine structural features like the flying buttresses supporting the enormous walls. and ponder the reason behind the cathedral's menacing characters.
There are spitting gargoyles at the edges of the cathedral. We know that those gargoyles frightened the visitors in the medieval times. Inside of the cathedral, they see all the angel figures, gold and the paradise symbols. So the visitors, they are happy, praying and doing the services.
Stepping inside the iconic roof, I was surprised to find it's supported by what was, at the time, cutting-edge technology.
Cologne Cathedral has no wood construction under the plates of the outside. There is metal construction from the year 1855 to 1860, and as one of the biggest metal construction you can see in Europe in the 19th century.
Hidden within this jungle of iron, I came across yet another treasure. An eerie pathway barely wide enough for a single person. It encircles the heart of the cathedral at a considerable height, passing at times within inches of the beautiful stained glass. Eventually leading to a vantage point very few have enjoyed. One that instantly took my breath away.
The craftsmen are still working on the cathedral. We reconstruct and restore the cathedral. 100 craftsmen work here every day, 365 days a year, and it will never stop.
Thanks to an abundance of loving care, the Cologne Cathedral has so far escaped the ravages of time and remains an architectural masterpiece certainly worth exploring. I hope you too will do what I did and immerse yourself in this Rhine treasure, listening for the stories these stones can tell.
Okay, so that was a little bit of the roof of Cologne Cathedral, and I have to say, every time I see this, I just get really, really excited. I remember one time I was there with some friends who are somewhat easily embarrassed, and they felt that they were horrified because I could just not stop being so excited, and I was perhaps a little too loud to their taste as I was just explaining how wonderful I thought it was. This is what Cologne looks like on a great summer day. Everyone's outside, and sooner or later, if you're a German, usually a little sooner rather than later, there is to be some beer. And each region in Germany has its own beer, has its own traditions. What we do in the evenings with our guests is show you what those traditions, those beer traditions, look like in Cologne. And I'll just kind of bullet out for you what you would experience if you were to do this. There is food in these places. It's usually very hearty, and it's a very small little menu. There is, of course, beer, and the beer comes in very narrow little glasses. And you could imagine that, you know, the first time you see those narrow little glasses, you're like, oh, I thought that, here's a good picture of it. You would imagine, oh, well, apparently people in Cologne don't drink all that much beer because these are only about half the size of the beer steins in Bavaria. Of course, people in Cologne tend to drink just a few more of these. The beer is simply called Kölsch, which means Cologne beer. And it's being served by a gentleman, by a waiter. It's usually men. By now they're also women, but they have a male nickname. They're called Kubbis, and the Kubbis will come around with a tray that he holds it in there's a grip kind of in the center of the tray, and then the glasses fit into these little slots, and he will come around and he will take your glass away. If it's empty or if it's almost empty, and put down a new one. And then there is always a beer tab on the table, and he will simply add another beer to your tab. Generally, you have to be somewhat alert because this goes very, very quickly. It's really just their job. Part of their job is also that they have the charm, I would say, of a New York waitress in a deli. Which means efficiency trumps niceties. but it's very much part of the experience. It's such a wonderful way of really kind of rubbing elbows with people that live in Cologne and drinking Cologne and eating Cologne. Okay, Heather, should we see if there are any questions about Cologne so far?
Yes, we have one from Alan in Myrtle Beach. He asks, from Cologne, is visiting the American Cemetery a viable day trip?
We're, I think, talking about the American Cemetery Margraten, and that is just across the border in the Netherlands. That would be doable, but it would probably take you about an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back. So yes, it would be doable. And you could talk to the people on the ship that could arrange this for you if you were so inclined.
Thank you. And we just have one more question from Mary in Sarasota. She says, again, asking about Christmas, she's heard that Cologne has a great Christmas market. Can you tell us a little bit about your holiday cruises that go there?
Yes. Cologne doesn't have one Christmas market. Cologne has 4 or 5. And it's but let's talk about the holiday markets. Amsterdam is on this itinerary. The Dutch do not have a tradition when it comes to Christmas markets. But once you're in Cologne, it's all around you. There's an enormous Christmas market right in front of the cathedral. There is another one that is on a second main square in the old town. Then there's one at the end of the pedestrian zone that has all the shops. A lot of the shops sell specific, most of the bakeries and a lot of the restaurants have little stalls outside that sell Christmas-like comfort food, if you will, glühwein. You'll be warm and very merry after about half an hour on the Christmas markets. And there's a little train. It's a little hokey, but it's a very convenient way of getting from one of these to another. You're well off also to just use your own feet. It's everywhere. There's even many years there is a kind of a medieval style Christmas market that is right next to the Chocolate Museum, and the Chocolate Museum is right on the Rhine. It sits on a little peninsula, overlooks the water and overlooks where the river cruise ships dock. And that's a lot of fun too. The kind of things that you buy there are candles, wooden toys, things that you could imagine people might have bought 150, 200, 300 years ago. So very simple handmade things. Cologne is amazing when it comes to that. I'll pick out some other highlights when it comes to the Christmas markets. Strasbourg is beautiful, has its own flair. We'll get to Strasbourg a little further down in this presentation, but Strasbourg is absolutely worth spending an afternoon roaming the Christmas markets. Let's see, Koblenz is really, really nice. Koblenz is relatively small, but it's just, for some odd reason, I always think of Koblenz as the Christmas market that has the best and the most glühwein. Don't ask me why. It's just that's just how it's stuck in my mind. It is just a wonderful one, and maybe that was because every time I went to Koblenz, it was just bitter cold during Christmas for whatever reason. Rüdesheim has a Christmas market. Basel has a Christmas market. Basel has an enormous what do you call them? A Ferris wheel out right next to the cathedral. That is quite exciting, and they do the same thing that Cologne does, although on a smaller scale. They have several different smaller Christmas markets throughout the old town. You can do the Rhine Getaway once in spring, and you just experience Europe in spring, and you go to Keukenhof, and in the very same year you can do it just all over again during the Christmas time, because it is that different. One is very, very different from another. Okay, I'm getting carried away with the Christmas market, so let's move on to the next day. From Cologne, we then move on to Koblenz. And this is a picture of the Viking Linn. And in the background, you see the place that we visit on this excursion, and on the excursion in Koblenz, and you also see how we get there. Those gondolas span across the Rhine, and they take you up to the fortress Ehrenbreitstein. What you can't see in this picture is that the fortress is across the mouth of the Moselle River. And we don't even think about it all that much these days anymore, because we live in the era of freeways and trains. But of course, for centuries, rivers were the main mode of provided the main mode of transportation. So a river like the Moselle that extends all the way into France was where you would want to keep an eye out for enemies from the west. And the Germans and the French, over the years along the Rhine, have sometimes had a very contentious relationship, and that was what Ehrenbreitstein was for. It was a fortress to ward off any people of ill will that would come down the Moselle, or possibly even sail up the Rhine. It's no longer in use, of course. It's a very extensive fortification, and it's quite an interesting. It's a very interesting, historically a very interesting building. I wouldn't say it's pretty, but it's just really interesting. And the best thing about it is, and that's a little difficult to see in this picture, but the views, Ehrenbreitstein really sits very, very high up over the river. Here the picture looks a little flat, but it's quite high up. And the views from Ehrenbreitstein down to the city and down to the confluence of the two rivers is absolutely spectacular. By the way, the reason I paused a little when I said the word confluence is that that's how Koblenz got its name. Koblenz is basically a bastardization of the word confluence. And this is a better picture of Ehrenbreitstein. Now you can really get a sense of, the vertical distance from the water level of the Rhine to where you stand when you overlook the scenery. And then another option that you would have from Koblenz is walking and seeing the city. Just to, this is very close by. Koblenz is a wonderful city with a lot of history and a lot of really interesting architecture. It has a wonderful small Jewish cemetery. And a third option that you would have when you are in Koblenz is to visit Marksburg Castle. And the Marksburg is, as you come from the Netherlands, it's one of the very first castles along the Middle Rhine that you encounter. And it's the only one that was never conquered, and therefore it's the most authentic one. It's one that is in the same shape as it was in medieval times, and we offered to take you there. It's an optional excursion because it's not for everyone. The reason it's not for everyone is because it is not a whole lot has changed since medieval times, and that means it's quite a climb to get up to the castle, and then inside the castle you also walk a lot of stairs, you walk a lot of steep walkways. It's quite an experience, but it's simply not something that we believe everyone is able to enjoy as much as we would want them to enjoy it. And that's why we gave you the option. Ehrenbreitstein is very accessible, and that's why Ehrenbreitstein is what we offer to everyone as an included excursion. So this is the Marksburg. This is a very iconic image, and you can see, I think that's a freight barge in the background, but that's the Rhine as it winds its way upriver towards Rüdesheim. Let's see a little video of what the Marksburg looks like on the inside. It's really quite interesting.
For centuries, Marksburg defended the Rhine at Braubach. Perched 90 meters above the water, virtually no activity on the river escaped detection. The castle dates to 1231, a time when the German Empire was split into small principalities, earldoms, and dominions. It was the High Middle Ages, a period when nearly 25,000 castles were built in Germany.
Everyone had to enclose his territory and secure it against neighbors who were perhaps not so friendly.
Gegenüber dem Nachbarn, der vielleicht nicht freundlich gesinnt war.
Marksburg was no exception. Towering over the Rhine, it was an intimidating, utterly unassailable sentinel. Even now, you can almost hear the echoes of well-trained soldiers and brave knights on horseback, relentlessly patrolling, ready to defend the castle's 4 gates. Time proved Marksburg impenetrable. With the castle's location and extreme defensive ramparts, it's little wonder that after 8 centuries, including an attack in World War II, Marksburg still stands as the only Rhine castle, never to have been conquered.
The idea of attacking Marksburg was so daunting, most armies quietly passed by. So the castle was usually defended by just 10 to 15 people during the Middle Ages.
Im Mittelalter.
Those invited into Marksburg discovered the castle was anything but opulent. Instead, life here was relatively Spartan. The original owners were the powerful lords of Epstein, while characters like John the Belligerent and Count Johann the Warlike, who was the last aristocrat to occupy Marksburg, played a large part in shaping the castle as it exists today. While there are no ghosts here, Marksburg does have an eerie tale.
Legend has it, the first count's daughter was said to marry a knight. That is until Saint Mark appeared. In the castle's tiny chapel, his spirit became visible and he revealed the knight was actually in league with the devil. Eternally grateful, the castle was renamed Marksburg. That's the only supernatural event that we know of.
Von denen wir wissen.
In the early 19th century, the castle fell into Napoleon's hands and he gifted it to the Duchy of Nassau. Then, in 1900, the German Castles Association, a private heritage foundation, bought Marksburg to preserve and protect it. Today, this stunning icon is home to a different kind of treasure. An immaculate collection of armament fit for a fortress such as this. More than 2,000 years of shaped steel and chainmail documenting the evolution of armor.
Life along the river has changed a lot with the centuries, but towering Marksburg Castle stands strong. It's an impeccable time capsule here on the Rhine.
Sei Dank schneit es nicht so oft hier am Rhein.
I hope you too will do what I did and immerse yourself in this Rhine treasure, listening for the stories this remarkable castle can tell.
Such an excellent shot of the Marksburg. The castle that you look at here with the Viking ship in the background is the castle of the Count of Katzenelnbogen. And that is German for the elbows of the cat. It's kind of a strange name, and the castle is usually known as Burg Katz. So the cat castle. There's also a mouse castle, and the story, of course, is that the cat and the mouse castle, the lords of the cat and the mouse castle fought each other all the time. And then in the background here, you see the Lorelei Rock. And what is not so easy to see, because the river meanders here, that is actually a very sharp curve. And the Rhine is a river that sees a lot of traffic. It's really kind of an artery of trade, and it always has been from Roman times on. And this is kind of the busiest spot on the Rhine. And also, that rock still sits there. It has never been eroded away because it's so hard. And a lot of that rock also is found in the riverbed here. And so this is where in years gone by, or hundreds of years ago, this was where captains would wreck their ships. And usually as soon as they wrecked their ships, they would blame some woman. And that's how the story of the Lorelei came about. The lady that sits on top of the rock and sings her songs and combs her golden hair and lures sailors to unsafe spots, and that's where they wreck their ships. It's no longer the case, but it's still, it's probably still a place where the captain will not want you on the bridge because he has to really pay attention. This is a castle that sits in the middle of the river. It's called Pfalzgrafenstein. And you sail right by it. It's probably one of the most spectacular views on the Middle Rhine. This is an area where I would say kilometer by kilometer, mile for mile, this is really the best river cruising anywhere in Europe. It's so iconic, it's so spectacular. There's one little village after another. There's one church steeple after another. There's a castle for every 3 or 4 miles or so. This is Castle Sonek. And this is Reichenstein, and they all, every castle has a story, and this is very much part of how you experience the Middle Rhine. The program director comes on the intercom, and as you sit on the sun deck and you look up, you get the stories of all these castles. Each castle has a multitude of stories. They have all been there for hundreds of years. They've all been attacked, destroyed, rebuilt, attacked again, rebuilt again. It's very dense with history, very dense with spectacular scenery, that Middle Rhine. And then at the end of this day, you end up in Rüdesheim. And Rüdesheim is where the Rhine gets to be a little wider. It's not, the slopes are not quite as steep. And this is where you transition from the very steep vineyards that line the Middle Rhine Gorge to the somewhat more glowing, somewhat more gradual hillscape of the Rheingau. And Rüdesheim sits right there, and it's a wine village. It's everyone in Rüdesheim that is that was there maybe 100 years ago before tourism took off. And the Middle Rhine is really where river cruising got its start. Before tourism took off, everyone in Rüdesheim worked in the wine business, and a lot of people still do. And we dock in town, on the edge of town, and we offer a number of different ways for you to experience this heritage. There is a monastery nearby where we combine wine tasting with medieval history, with a Romanesque architecture. There is another option where we bring you out in the hills where you get to experience what a wine family has been doing over generations with their wines. And then there's a way to just walk into town and experience what, kind of the quintessential Rüdesheim experience, which is the product of a good 150 years of Rhine tourism. And then as we leave Rüdesheim, we then the next day we travel towards Speyer, and this is a good picture of Speyer. It's a city that, again, and this goes for most of the cities along the Rhine. As I mentioned, the Rhine is an artery of not just of commerce and transportation. It's also how the culture moved from north to south. There are legends of people that traveled all the way to Rome, took the Rhine all the way to Basel, and then started their trek overland across the Alps. The Rhine, if you're coming from the north, the Rhine really allows you to get into the heart of Europe. And so all these major cities along the Rhine have roots that go back at a very minimum 1500 years. In the case of Cologne, as I mentioned, it goes back to Roman times. Speyer is one of those cities. Possibly the most interesting aspect of Speyer is that it has such an incredibly rich religious history. And that, maybe that doesn't sound all that attractive if you're not really into that, but what it has left is an incredibly rich architecture in a relatively small area. What you're looking at here on the left-hand side is the remaining town gate. And then on the right-hand side, that is the city hall. And the city hall is right next door to the dome of Speyer. And dome is a German word, and basically what it means is cathedral. It's short for cathedral. And there's not really a good rhyme or reason why some cathedrals are called Kathedrale in German and others are just referred to as dome. But in Speyer, we call this a dome, and it's an imperial dome because it goes all the way back to the emperors of the Middle Ages, the German emperors of the Middle Ages. 8 of them are buried in this cathedral. And it is one of the largest Romanesque buildings in the world. Romanesque architecture was much earlier than Gothic architecture. It was, the challenge for the architects was how to keep a building as big as this one from collapsing onto itself. You will see very massive columns and pillars and very thick walls. It's not very adorned, but you can imagine that what people, you only have to imagine what people felt like in, let's say, the 11th century, walking into a cathedral like that, looking up and looking kind of beyond that to the heavens. And it's easy to understand how impressed people were when they saw a cathedral like this. Speyer became a very, very important pilgrimage site. And from where this picture was taken, you're kind of standing next to a very tall statue of someone that was walking the Camino to Santiago de Compostela, a very important religious pilgrimage that brought people from all over Europe to northern Spain, to the city of Santiago de Compostela. And Speyer was one of the way stations on that journey. In Speyer, we also have a mikveh, a religious, a Jewish religious bath. It's one of the best preserved in all of Germany. And then from Speyer, we offer you the option of spending your day in Heidelberg. Heidelberg sits on a river. You can see it here in the right-hand side of the picture, but that's the Neckar. And the Neckar is a small little river with low bridges. Ships cannot go to Heidelberg directly, but it's close enough to the Rhine that we can bring you there by coach, and you can spend a good part of your day exploring the city, exploring the castle, the downtown area, the old university, meeting students. Heidelberg is one of the oldest college towns in Germany, and part of the overall experience is to really just see what life is like. It's really a university where you don't necessarily go because you have burning ambitions to make it big in science or in law or in politics. It's a university where you go because you want to experience what university life is like. The university has buildings throughout the old town, and it really very much shapes the atmosphere of Heidelberg. It's just a very, very wonderful city. And we set our guests up with lunch with university students so that they can tell you a little bit about what it is that attracts them to Heidelberg. Heather, I'm going to take a little break and ask if there are any questions about Heidelberg or the Middle Rhine or Rüdesheim or Speyer.
Thanks, Joost. Yes, we have a quick question from Mary in Sarasota. She asks, what food and wine do you recommend people to try when they're visiting Rüdesheim and the Rhine towns?
Well, the wines that you try are just the Riesling is quite famous in that area. You have it's a white wine area, and what I would recommend is that you try what is being served by wherever you are, because you will get the best stories. There's a reasonable chance, because all of these are relatively small vintners, there's a reasonable chance that you will be talking to the people that do the actual winemaking themselves, or are at least very heavily involved in it. What you see in this image, that's pork shank. The cuisine of this part of Germany is rather heavy. It's stick to your ribs food. It tends to be heavy on meats and on potatoes. I would have small portions of what is there. You will not find that there's an enormous variety. What people serve here is really a good variety of different wines. There is a tiny little bit of red wine, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would stick with the white wines. and eat whatever food is served locally. It's great fun. It's certainly not high cuisine, but it is of a very good standard quality throughout this entire region. Okay, anything else?
That's it for now, thanks, Joost.
Okay, all right, so then we move on from Speyer, we get to Strasbourg. And I know that I just said Strasbourg, which is the German pronunciation, and of course I should say Strasbourg, because Strasbourg is in France. But not so fast. Strasbourg is in Alsace. And if you look at the map of France, you will see that Alsace sits behind the Vosges Mountains. And it's a little detached from the rest of France. And throughout its history, it has had close ties across the river to the Rhineland of Germany. And people in Alsace have a cuisine that is very reminiscent of that of Germany. We just a moment ago spoke about food. The Alsatians like their choucroute. And what the French call choucroute is what the Germans call sauerkraut. Choucroute in Alsace is served virtually the same way it's done in Germany. It's a stick to your ribs kind of dish with sausage, with a slice of pork, with a slice of salt bacon, and it's kind of the traditional dish in Alsace. Even the pastries that are served there are kind of reminiscent of what they do in Germany. It's quite heavy on the dairy. There's a lot of cheese, of course, in Alsace, and this, what you see, is the roof of the cathedral, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that's the tallest tower probably that you will see as you're in Europe. There's a tower that's a little taller in southern Germany, but that's not all that accessible. Whereas, Strasbourg is right on the Rhine. And you should not, should not miss the opportunity to look at that incredibly tall tower. And if you're brave enough, we have an excursion that takes you up the tower on foot. I don't remember exactly the number of stairs, but a few years ago we decided that we should have some excursions that would appeal to people that want to be moving around and about a little bit, that are a little bit more active. And we thought a little bit outside the box. We didn't want to go immediately to, well, let's just do a bicycle tour of Strasbourg. We said, what else could we do that makes people's heart pump their blood a little bit faster? And so we set up a tour that takes you to the top of the tall tower, almost to the top of the tall tower, but you do so with your own legs. Obviously, the tour of the city itself is also done on foot, by and large. There is a bit of touring the outskirts to see the European Parliament on a coach, but Strasbourg is also a city that has some canals. It's the nicest way of exploring most cities in Europe with your own 2 feet. In the afternoon, we take you into wine country. You're not far away from the vineyards of Alsace. There are lots of these little villages that again, this half-timbered, it happens to be in Strasbourg itself, but this is what the villages in Alsace look like as well. It is a little reminiscent of what Germany looks like, but this part of France really has sort of a dual identity. The Alsatian dialect sits squarely between German and French. And sadly, it's spoken mostly by older people. But there's still a lot of young people who are trying to keep it alive. And you still hear it a lot in the streets. Going out into the vineyards, again, it's what we try to do as much as we can is to show you vineyards of people that actually still roll up their sleeves every morning and work in their vineyards every day. So as much as we want you to taste the wine, we also want you to meet the people that make the wine. And we want you to have a slice of what their daily lives looks like. So that is kind of the palette of things that we have on offer in Alsace. The next day, we're still kind of between France and Germany. We docked the ship in a small town called Breisach, and Breisach towards the east provides access to the Black Forest, a part of southern Germany that is, the forest itself is a small part of the landscape, but it's the most significant. When you look from France into Germany, what you see are these hills with these very dense forests of pine trees. And from a distance, they look black. That's where the name comes from, the Black Forest. There's also a lot of vineyards there. There are these villages with gently sloping streets. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just being asked if I can turn my camera on and off. And of course, I will do as I need to. James, I hope we're back. You see these streets, and it's a little up and down, but it never gets all that bad in the foothills of the Black Forest, and that's why one of the ways we make the Black Forest accessible to you is by using an e-bike. And it's such a beautiful, especially when it's sunny, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful, well-manicured landscape with vineyards and little fields and orchards and little villages. And without having any magnificent cathedrals or museums or anything like that, it's just such a lovely landscape that you get to ride through on a bicycle. And e-bikes are the best invention ever because they allow you to really go a little bit further than you would normally do if you would have to do all the heavy lifting yourself. And then on the other side of Breisach, you have to cross the Rhine River. You get into southern Alsace to the town of Colmar. And Colmar is kind of a real life postcard. It has these half-timbered houses that are really incredibly picturesque. It's kind of I would almost say it's a Strasbourg in miniature. This is a picture of Colmar. And this is not an exaggeration. This is not one of those postcards from the 1970s that people colored after they took the picture. This is what Colmar looks like. And it has these little canals. It has a beautiful main square, a smaller church. It also, interestingly, has a phenomenal little museum that used to be the house of the French gentleman that created the Statue of Liberty. And the museum, it doesn't take more than half an hour to go through it. But the museum kind of tells this man's life story. And throughout the museum, there are masks that represent the Statue of Liberty, and there are smaller versions of it. It's really such an interesting the man and his work type of a museum. Colmar is also great for shopping. It's a tourist destination, granted, but it's a tourist destination that has struck a really nice balance between just being a place where the French go out and have a glass of wine and buy their own cheese for their, for back home. There's a beautiful covered market with all kinds of great things, great delicacies. That sits kind of where this picture is. It's the covered market is about 300 yards away. Very manageable on foot. So again, in Breisach, and we do this in every port on these journeys, we try to offer you quite a number of different experiences where we use the ship as a jump off point. This, of course, these are pictures, kind of iconic pictures of the Black Forest. For those of you that have this image in your head, the Black Forest is where I'm going to have to get myself a cuckoo clock. Yeah, that's very much part of that part of Germany. It's very much a part of the heritage there. And we do bring you to a place where you can look at how these are made. And it's quite an intricate process. The real good ones are still very much made by hand, and we take you to a place that demonstrates how this is done. And obviously, they can also you have an opportunity to buy these. They set you back quite a good penny a halfway decent cuckoo clock, when it's handmade, is not to be had for under, I would say, $600. There are obviously things that are a lot less expensive than that, but we find that it's one of the things that people still want to do, still want to have this iconic idea of the cuckoo clock in Germany. There's more to Germany, of course, than the cuckoo clocks. We also, in Strasbourg, but we don't want to go back with the slides, but we take you to the Mercedes factory if you want, to see something that's very modern, very stylish, and very 21st century in Germany. And after Breisach, we end up in Basel. And Basel is where I'm at home. What you see in the background is my office here in the Viking offices in Basel. This is the Cathedral Hill, and I don't need to tell you an awful lot about Basel. This is where your cruise ends, and after your cruise, you have an opportunity to spend an extra 2 days in Basel, or you can spend an extra 2 days in Lucerne, which is kind of quintessential Switzerland, a lake, a gorgeous mountainscape, the opportunity to go up into the Alps. But staying in Basel has its own rewards, and you can, if you go on Viking.TV and you look at some of the back episodes, you will find that there's an episode that I hosted that gives you an idea of what things you can do in Basel. And with that, I'm going to leave it. Heather, any questions that people may have? I'm ready.
Thank you, Joost. We've had lots of questions come in, so I'll start from the beginning. We have a question from Roland in Tadley. He would like to know what Viking offers to make their trips all-inclusive. He says it's not that he wants to drink excessively, but he would just like to not have to split the bill with his party of friends. What can we offer him for that?
We include beer and wine with dinner, and soft drinks. I think the depending on how, and I understand the question, and no one is we rarely have people who are just on the cruise to drink. We say that we're not the drinking man's cruise, we're the thinking man's cruise. But if you like to have a cocktail in the evening and perhaps a glass of wine with friends, we have a silver spirits beverage package, which actually, and I would encourage people to just kind of do a little bit of the math. It's a very, very reasonably priced way to basically make sure that upfront you pay an amount of money that covers virtually everything that you would drink on board, with the exception of rare whiskeys and rare vodkas. But it really kind of covers anything that you would drink at any time on the ship. And certainly, it's something that I would recommend if you, if you want to just have as many choices as you can for a reasonable amount of money.
Thank you, Joost.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Strasbourg, we have a question from Suzanne in the United States. She's interested in going to visit the Maginot Line. Is that something she's able to do?
In Strasbourg, we don't offer that, but I understand what the idea is. The Maginot Line is a series of fortifications that run along that contested border between Germany and France. And we do offer something out of Breisach that covers World War II, and it touches a little bit on World War I as well. And it focuses on the battles that took place in the area around Colmar and Breisach. We do this with a team of historians that are local, that know the area like the back of their hand, and they know the World War I trenches, they know the fortifications of the Maginot Line, and they know, they tell the story of the Battle of the Colmar Pocket. So yes, we do cover that quite extensively on that excursion.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Sandy in Lewistown. They ask, what's the weather like in September for cruising on the Rhine?
Okay, and we get a lot of questions about the weather, and I always like to preface this by saying Europe has a temperate climate. that basically means that at any given time it can rain or the sun can be out. And often when we get these questions, these may be people that live, let's say, in the Western United States. I spent about half my life in California, in Southern California, and you know that there's a certain part of the year, most of the year, where the weather is consistently, 72 degrees and sun. It doesn't necessarily work that way in Europe, but I would say that September is still very much the peak of summer. There may be a rainy day here and there. It gets a little cooler. August and July tend to be the hottest months. So I would say September is perfect, really.
Thank you. Susan, she asks about Colmar. So she wants to know, is where the ship docks, is it possible to walk into Colmar on her own, or does she need to get on a tour to do this?
You need transportation to get to Colmar. Breisach is walk off the ship into Germany, and it literally, to get into town or to get to the cathedral, for instance, never takes more than 15 minutes. But Colmar is about a 15-minute ride away.
Great, thank you. Sue in Sudbury in the United States, she's got a 2-day extension in Basel booked for December. What would you say are the must-sees?
You have to watch the video then, in that case, if you want to know. There are a handful of things in there that are kind of my personal favorites. I would say one of the must-sees that's not in that video is the Beiler Foundation. It's a modern art museum that has gargantuan Monets, water lilies. It has works by Jackson Pollock. It has works by Mark Rothko, and it usually has really interesting other exhibits. The art museum is also a great place to start. It has a lot of different art from all over the world. It also has a very cute little section of Swiss art. Mountains, obviously, but a really interesting collection of paintings and drawings and etches of mountains. And for that alone, I would go to the Basel Art Museum. And you have to do a ferry ride in Basel. Even if it's a little cold, you can still do it. You don't have to swim in the Rhine in winter, but you have to do a little ferry ride because it's just so much fun, and it's one of the cheapest things that you can do while you're in Basel.
Thank you. Going back to the pre-extensions, Terry in Bel Air asks, is it possible to do 2 pre or post extensions? She'd love to do The Hague and Amsterdam, not have to pick between the 2.
That gets a little tricky. Call Viking or call your travel agent and see what they can do. The way that this would likely work is you would fly into Amsterdam. Amsterdam is the big airport. There's no The Hague airport one way or another. And then what we could likely do is, if you have 2 nights in Amsterdam, then move into the extension in The Hague. That's something that you could do. We don't offer it as a package, but we can certainly make it work. And because we offer these cruises almost every day, as long as you're in a hotel that we also use for other extensions, we would be able to give you a hotel in Amsterdam where you would have the support of a Viking hospitality desk. We have local staff in all of these cities that basically help you make the most of your time there. The extensions tend to focus on independent exploration, but that doesn't mean that we leave you to your own devices. You will always have a Viking person that can tell you, if you want to go to a market, if you want to do some shopping, if you want to go to a museum, you have someone there that can help you plan your day. And so that's how I would solve that. Spend 2 nights in Amsterdam before you do your The Hague package, and that will take care of all of it.
Great, thank you. We now have a question from Stephanie in Pasadena. She asks, is it true in Cologne, if you sit outside and hit the bell, you pay for everyone's drinks in the house?
Yes, if you are a German, they will probably make you do that. If you can identify yourself as someone that's not from there, they will probably forgive you. But now that you already know, stay away from the bell unless you want to pay around for everyone.
Thank you. Kathy in the United States asks, is it possible to see the catacombs, I believe in Cologne?
Yes, yes, it is. There is a tour that takes you into the into what's left of it. Now, it's not something for the faint-hearted. It's dark. The people that take you in there carry lights, torches, and it's an experience. It's not as spectacular as the catacombs in Paris, for instance. That's something that you have to keep in the back of your head. But it's certainly, you know, a really interesting way of experiencing Cologne, and it does take you into that bottom layer of Cologne's history.
Great, thank you. Roger in the United States asks, is it possible to combine this tour, the Rhine, with Oberammergau?
Yes. It's a little, you know, it's from Basel to get to Oberammergau is it's quite a drive, but it's possible. And obviously, you know, initially we had set all this up for 2020. It's now been postponed, and we are as inventory, if you will. As we get the hotel contracts in place and things like that, we are still in the process of building out the offer that we have in Oberammergau. The more logical connection, if you will, is with a Danube cruise that begins in Nuremberg, that begins or ends in Nuremberg, or begins and ends in Passau. It's just because it's closer. But that's not to say that you couldn't do it this way as well.
Thank you. Jane in Canada asks, is it possible to do a cruise that includes both the Rhine and the Moselle rivers?
Yes, but that's for another day. We offer a cruise from Cities of Lights that goes from Paris to Prague, and that covers the Moselle. It covers that section of the middle Rhine with all the castles, and then it covers the Main. And I would say that's, you know, just as far as just the riverscapes are concerned, that's a spectacular cruise. Small little towns. It doesn't take you to Cologne, for instance, or to Strasbourg. The cities are Paris and Prague, but the stuff in between, in all these little cities and smaller towns along the Moselle and the Rhine and the Main. If what you really enjoy is spending time sitting on the sun deck or sitting on your balcony and watching the world go by, that's a spectacular cruise. It really is.
Thank you. We have a question from Jean in St. Louis. She says, are there advantages to start the cruise in Basel or Amsterdam?
I should, of course, have started with that, because there are advantages and disadvantages. I would be very hesitant to say, okay, this is the better direction, because I think there's a certain charm in following the river to the sea. And so from Basel to Amsterdam has a natural feel to it. I think that may be, you know, that may appeal. Having said that, if you travel from Amsterdam to Basel, I do think that, you know, the stretch of river between Cologne and Amsterdam is interesting, but it's not as scenic as the stretch, you know, where you're between the mountains of Alsace and the Black Forest. And then, you know, when you get to Basel, you still have Switzerland ahead of you if you so choose. So I think as far as the landscape is concerned, I think the Amsterdam to Basel itinerary ends on a high note. And to also answer a question that is kind of related, and I know that there are people out there that are wondering about this, the time to spend in your stateroom watching the world go by is really when the ship is moving. To try to pick a side of the ship that is better than the other side when it comes to the direction that you're traveling in is an impossible puzzle to solve, because it all depends on how the ship has to dock. And the ship generally docks with its nose, if you will, with its bow towards the current. But that's not the case everywhere. And frankly, when the ship is docked, we really want you to experience the shore. And if you're simply going on the ship and you're enjoying your stateroom as we're traveling, it doesn't really matter. It's interesting on both sides. And if you want to, if you're adamant about wanting to see both sides, you take a chair and you park yourself on the sun deck. That's the best place. Or the aquavit terrace, which might even be still a little better because you're very close to getting your drink. There is waiters, of course, on the sun deck, but it's so nice to, from the aquavit terrace, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to get yourself a coffee or a glass of water. It's the aquavit terrace is everyone's favorite place on the ship, I think.
Thank you. We have a question from Stan in the United States. He just wants to check, are the Rhine cities included on the cruise generally safe for walking on your own?
Yes, unequivocally, yes. You would take normal precautions as you would in any bigger city, but the biggest risk that you would really run is pickpocketing. Other than that, it's entirely safe, and even pickpocketing, I don't believe, is a big problem in any of the cities that you would visit. Sadly, as I'm Dutch, the place where I would put my wallet in the pocket with a zipper is Amsterdam. But again, that is about as far as it goes, and it doesn't happen very frequently. These are really safe cities.
Thank you. Barbara says, thank you for the great narrative with hints for our October trip on the Rhine. She would like to know, are the meals on the ship each day reflective of the city we are in?
Yes, of course. Generally, you will have, obviously, you will have a choice. You will have a vegetarian choice. You will have a meat dish, a fish dish. But we try very hard to present you with what you would find if you were to dine on shore. And usually we make sure that the wait staff knows the story and can tell you why what you find on your plate. And that can be breakfast, lunch, and dinner is interesting and reflective of where you travel. It goes all the way to, like, if you go to the coffee stations and you get yourself a little cappuccino and a cookie, you'll have some, I would call them, classics. You'll probably always be able to find a chocolate chip cookie at the coffee station, but there's likely to be a cookie of that particular city or that particular region. So you'll find it permeates everything that you could possibly put in your mouth. It has little touches of the places that we visit.
Thank you. And just a couple more questions about the weather. So Joanne would like to know what the weather is going to be like in August. And Jocelyn asks, in June, would she need a jacket for evenings on board the ship?
Yes, you do need a jacket for on board the ship, and then you're going to get mad at me if you don't get to use your jacket. It is kind of tricky because the weather is variable. I would always bring a light jacket. June and August are warm months normally, but depending on where exactly you are, you may catch quite a bit of wind on the sun deck. That can chill you a little bit, especially in the evenings. So I would always bring a light jacket. You don't need to bundle up in June or in August, not at all. But to bring some layered clothing is always a good advice. If push comes to shove, by the way, little plug here, if it gets cold and you're ill prepared, get one of these. You can get these on the ship, and they're comfortable and they're functional, and they have a great Viking story. And this is something I don't know. My wife reminds me every once in a while that I should wear something else, because I just, this is kind of, I love wearing these.
Thank you, Joost. Stephanie in Pasadena would like to know about sailing the Middle Rhine. So is there time to step off the ship and explore some of the castles you showed us earlier?
There isn't after the Marksburg. So the Marksburg is the one castle that you can visit, and Ehrenbreitstein Fortress. But beyond that, not all of these castles are actually, most of them are not necessarily accessible unless you go through a lot of, jump through a lot of hoops. They're much more to enjoy from the ship than they are to explore. But the Marksburg is the one castle. If that's really what you want to do, you have to go and book yourself well ahead of time on that Marksburg castle visit. It is, of all the castles, and this is why it's in our, if you will, in our portfolio of excursions, I think it's the best castle that you could visit on the Middle Rhine.
Thank you. And linked to that, Linda asks, how long does it take to climb up the Marksburg Castle?
Well, you're brought up most of the way by a little coach. It's not so much the time. It'll probably from where the coach parks to the entrance of the castle is 15 minutes maybe. It's not so much the time spent getting there as it is it's fairly steep. And the pavement is relatively uneven. You may have seen where Karina was walking as she entered the castle. It's rock. A big chunk of that castle is just built into the rock. So the pavement is uneven, and it can get a little slippery if it's wet. Now there are things that you can hold on to. It's not dangerous, but it is somewhat strenuous. You have to be in reasonably good shape to be able to enjoy that.
Thank you, Joost. I think we're nearly coming to the end of the questions that we've received now. So we've just got one last one here from Maggie. She would like to know if you could recommend a best stateroom to stay on the ship.
Best stateroom on the ship? You're going to find this a boring answer, but the Explorer suites obviously have the widest view. And the most space, but honestly, I think you need to look at the staterooms as there's not a bad stateroom on the ship. I would, if that fits with your picture of what kind of money you want to spend, I would pick a room with a French balcony at a very minimum. But really, there is. If you decide to have a lower category stateroom, you will simply spend a lot more time in the lounge and on the sun deck and at the Aquavit terrace. So it's really, I could make a recommendation, but it tends to be up to, what it is that you're looking. If you think that you're going to spend quite a bit of time there, get at least a French balcony, but probably a full balcony, because that is where you want to spend your time.
Thank you, Joost. I think that's all we've got time for on the questions today. So any others that came through, we'll certainly make sure that our team behind the scenes gets back to you and answers any of those. So thank you to everyone who sent questions in.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to be back to talk about other great itineraries we have. And I'm in Basel. Come visit me.